You may get their job out of them, but you'll never get the extra. You'll never get the most out of them or your team.
Woe unto the leader who thinks that just because you're in a given physical space with somebody, that means that you've built a relationship.
I mean, the science obviously is pretty clear. These relationships, like you said, it's the concrete that heals itself, especially during times of stress.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership, why these things matter, and how we can do them well. Those are the questions we wrestle with through thoughtful discussions and real-world stories. I'm Tom Collins, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Hamrick, and we're delighted you've joined us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, we're talking about something that probably seems elementary, I guess, but it's often severely underappreciated in leadership, and that's building relationships. Something nice to have once the real work is done. But the truth is exactly opposite. Relationships are not separate from the work of leadership. In many ways, they are the work of leadership.
Tom, I couldn't agree more. You always keep going back to this. I'm a team guy. It seems like when most people talk about leadership or write about leadership, they talk about mission statements and core values and strategy and execution. But when it really boils down to a lot of teams, which leadership is, it's the space between people. It's the relationships.
That's right. Leadership is relational by nature. It's that ability to influence. You can have authority without relationships. You can have a title without relationships. You can even have expertise without relationships, but you cannot lead people well for long without relationships, because if people don't trust you, if they don't feel known by you, if they don't believe you care about them and don't experience connection with you, your influence becomes shallow and fragile.
I mean, in practical terms, you may get their job out of them, but you'll never get the extra. You'll never get the most out of them or your team. You know, like a wide receiver, like, yeah, I ran the route. Yeah, but I just need the little extra. Like, and only people who are going to do the extra is when there is a relationship in the entire team.
Justin, that's a really key concept of this discussion. It's being able to accomplish what is possible. If we don't have that relationship with them, they won't do what's possible. Building relationships is not about faking warmth toward people. It's not about collecting friendships. It's not about lowering the standards by any means. It's about really creating the human connection that allows trust and candor, resilience, and coordinated effort to grow.
Leaders who ignore this eventually are going to pay the price for it, right? I mean, the communication is going to start to suffer. It'll get thinner. Feedback will not be legitimate. It'll be filtered. They're not going to feel the need to bring up problems that previously they might have. Problems are going to get hidden. People will become disengaged and teams become transactional. The entire thing is transactional. Like, am I doing my job? Well, yeah, you're doing your job, but we need more.
Right. And that's why today I think let's talk about building relationships, why that matters, what it looks like in practice, how leaders can do it better.
Well, let's start where we always start, the what. So let's define what we're talking about. So, you know, this is a very nebulous thing, relationships. I mean, it's got so many different meanings. But when we're talking about leadership and the science of leadership, let's get to the basic question. What does it mean to build relationships in leadership?
The first thing that comes to mind is intentionality. I mean, we're talking about building relationships the same way that somebody might build a bridge, you know, literally, not figuratively, but build an actual, you know, civil engineering structure, bridge. There's intentionality, there's planning, there's effort that goes into that. And that intentionality creates trust and reciprocal sort of respect for that. It creates human connections with the people that you lead and the people you work with. I think it's getting to know people in really meaningful ways. What makes them tick, who they are, who they're hoping to be, what are they hoping to do. In my book, I talk about this as caring about people. When we do that, we help people feel seen, valued, understood. We create a safe space so that they can be honest. You talked about earlier, people won't bring you feedback and that sort of thing. So we create that safety where when they bring that feedback that we may not necessarily want to hear, it's honest and it's something that's really important. So relationship building often shows up in these sort of very, what we call ordinary behaviors. And learning what matters to people, you know, is a part of that. And following up on things they told you. If somebody tells you something that is important to them, don't just forget about it, because that keeps it transactional. That makes them feel unappreciated, like you don't care. Making time for people when it's inconvenient, listening carefully. And how often have we talked about listening? Being consistent, telling the truth, being respectful under pressure, showing up in difficult moments, In that moment, I think your leadership is not, certainly it's not positional, it's not authoritative, it's personal in the best sense of the word, I think.
Hmm. It's interesting you mentioned the word intentionality. I think that's a big deal when building relationships. You can't do it on the back end. You can't at the end of the task be like, "Hey guys, I care about you." Like you can't say it. It has to be clear from the beginning that everyone on that team knows that you care about their success. That's the story that's got to be told by the team. Like, hey, our culture is we care about each other. We care about the success of everybody. And that sort of, I like that you brought that back to what you reference in your book of building relationships is caring about people. And that's caring about what makes them tick, but also caring about their success, not necessarily the team's success, although that is part of it, but also their success and them knowing that. You being intentional, like when you're building a bridge, everyone knows when you start building the bridge where you're going on the other side. And that's a
Right.
great point of like from the first rebar that gets laid, you know where the direction you're going. And I think that same intentionality in building relationships is really important. Like everyone knows where you're going. You don't get to the other side and they're like, and you say, "Oh, I care about you." And they're like, "Well, why didn't I know that back then in the beginning?" So I think that's a great point of the intentionality in it.
Yeah. And as you're saying, the intentionality means it is effort, right? It isn't
Mm,
just passive. It's not just we're here beside each other. I think certainly evidence, science shows that proximity, literally proximity, closeness to each other increases the likelihood of having a meaningful relationship with somebody. We know that. And that's obvious. We become friends with our next door neighbor, not with somebody who's on the other side of the earth. I mean, it's just that, right? But we need to recognize that just because you work with someone every day, that doesn't mean you have a real relationship with them. Just because you sit in meetings together or you exchange emails or, in the case of medicine, you round together, go around and see the patients, that doesn't mean that you've built that relationship. It doesn't mean that you built that understanding. It doesn't mean that you have built that trust that you really need.
for some reason, the movie or the series Band of Brothers comes to mind. And there's two sort of leaders, people in position of authority. And one is leading because they want their own success and their own accolades. And yes, the team does what they ask, but then no more. And then another leader comes in that it's very obvious from the very beginning that they care about the team. They're very intentional about it. And what they're able to achieve from that team is very, very different. So it's I don't know why that popped up in my head, but like the sort of two people in the same position, actually one was a higher ranking, were able to do so much different because of the relationships that they had with that group or the people that they were leading.
Yeah, I think so many people don't understand this, that just because you're great in what you do, if you're by yourself, you won't be as great as the group of people. None of us is smarter than all of us, and similarly, none of us can accomplish more than all of us. That's math. And so relationship building is that. It's distribution across a wider group, accessing a greater amount of capability, perspective, energy, all these things to move toward that common goal. And so it just, if nothing else, mathematically, I think makes sense that building relationships is valuable. So, Justin, I was wondering, as you think about this concept and think about your career or not even necessarily career, but life, can you think of a good example of someone that you've known who was really intentional about relationship building?
I've got a friend at work who has been in various leadership positions throughout the hospital, and he sometimes struggles with the what I'll call the managerial aspects of leadership. But one thing he has always excelled in is relationships, and he's able to get a lot out of teams due to that. And it's very clear when he walks in a room, he cares about the people in it. He remembers their name. He remembers their kids, what they're involved in, what they like every time, where they're from. Like he's very intentional about it. And what it creates is he makes himself vulnerable because he's opening up a relationship between he and other people. But people respond well to that because he creates a situation where people understand that he cares about them more than what they can do for him. It's really powerful to watch.
Let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you'll order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. Those people create a sense of importance in the other person, like this feeling that, hey, I'm valued,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that translates, I think, into the person receiving that, the person feeling valued, giving more, being more invested in the relationship, in the activity, in the outcome than they would have been otherwise. As you were talking, I was thinking about if we look at certain people in history, uh, say political history, there's some people who I'm thinking of like Bill Clinton. He has been known for his ability to connect with people
Hmm.
in a phenomenal way. Like he has the ability to remember something about somebody that he met 10 years ago, right? Like he may have met them in a meeting. Oh, I'm Tom and I've got 2 kids and blah, blah, blah. And he has this superpower, it seems like, where 10 years later he can walk up to somebody and say, hey, Tom, how are your 2 kids doing? And people are like, holy smokes, this guy, A, remembers me, B, remembers something about me that
Yeah.
was important to me, right? And
Yeah.
and in that moment, and I don't care what folks' politics are about. I'm talking about a human capability and the ability to connect with people. That's what we're talking about. In that moment, somebody suddenly goes, this guy cares. I'm going to do my best to help him out in whatever way that I can be of assistance, because I'm important to this guy for some reason. And it changes people's perspectives, I think, in a way that's just incredible. Hard to quantify, I think.
It's interesting. I think people can smell false humility and can
Mm.
smell false concern. I think this is probably something that people can work on. But as you're talking about all of that with that example, what I see is it takes effort.
Yeah.
Like, no effort would be, how's your family? And I'll say effort equals compassion, caring, because that's what relationship, you got to put some energy into it. Effort means I remembered not that you have a family, that you have 2 kids. Hey, how's your oldest son? Is he still playing baseball? Like that took some effort of to save that, put it in your brain. That's going to take up space. That's going to take my energy versus a different approach where you could be trying to achieve the same thing, but you just didn't value it enough to put in the effort, I guess.
It's actually taken a moment to think about it, right? So I was thinking about my late father-in-law, and I was thinking about charisma and how people can be charismatic. He was the kind of person who filled up a room,
Mhm.
okay? And he would go and meet people and was typically jovial and this sort of thing and disarming, I think, for a lot of people. And he had a little bit of that, if we say Clintonian capability, right, to connect with people. But behind the scenes, and this gets to intentionality. Behind the scenes, if he showed up at some sort of gathering, if there was some people there that he's supposed to know, and he didn't necessarily remember all about them or whatever, he would maybe be his wife, maybe be my wife, his daughter. Hey, who is so and so right there? What do they do? Basically get a little prompting, and then he would go over and he would turn on the sort of charisma, if you will. Oh, hey, how is whatever business going, or this sort of thing that he was just prompted on by his wife, my wife, whatever the circumstance may be. In that moment, it's intentionality to say, this is a really important interaction to me. I don't necessarily remember all the material, but I'm going to take the effort to get it before I go into that moment so that they see that I actually care, you know, about them in that regard. So I think that because there's some people that have difficulty with remembering names or that
Mhm.
sort of stuff, right? You don't necessarily just have to have that right at the front of your brain all the time. Maybe you have some, crutch, if you will, to help you. But at the end of the day, it's about making the effort, making it important in your mind that I'm going to do this. I think that goes a long way.
I think that's true. Like, I mean, you study for tests that are important to you. Like, you learn how to play an instrument, you don't naturally just remember where the keys are and how to play notes. For years, I couldn't remember my wife's all sizes of dresses and pants and all that to buy her, so I carried around it in my wallet because it was important to me. I need to
Yeah,
remember, okay, if I want to buy her a
right.
T-shirt, it's this size. If I want to buy her pants, it's this size. Shoe size, this. Like, I mean, it mattered to me, so I had a little card in my wallet if I ever needed to reference it. But it does. Relationships are effort, and I think the willingness to put in that effort is what really tells the story.
Can I share like I've been chuckling as you've been talking, not because what you're saying is inherently funny per se, but a place where my intentionality for the longest time was so off target when it comes to this. Okay. So, in malls, of course, this is framed out of, say, circa 2000. Okay, back when I was in medical school and going to the mall was a thing or whatever.
I
And
hear malls are coming back, so that may actually be a thing
yeah,
too.
well, so maybe some folks out there still remember what a mall is or whatever. But and they have these different brands, and Taylor and all this sort of stuff, right? And so I was always trying to show my then girlfriend, fiance, wife that I really was trying to care, that I was really trying to to be thoughtful, right? And so we'd be going through them all, and there are a couple of stores that are for plus size women.
Oof.
Okay, and I won't name those. The folks that are listening who know about these sorts of stores know. And it took me a decade to remember that those stores were for plus size women. My wife is not a plus size lady. Okay, and and so I'd be like, oh hey, they have one of these stores, right? Do you want to go in that store? And it would always be like, I nothing in that store would fit me, right?
Is the
So
store big and tall? Like, is it where you're?
it's no, it's the female, it's a female sort of maybe equivalent. Anyway, so I was trying my best. That's an example of being off target, But anyway, just really ridiculous on my part. So, but great. Like for you, that's something that a card with the sizes, Jenny's different things. I think that's actually brilliant because I think it shows intentionality. It shows that this is important to you, and it allows you to spring ta-da, a gift or whatever to show her that you care. I mean, I think that when we take that time, when we are intentional about, communicating to people that we value them for who they are, it is amazing how quickly, if we step outside of our marriages and that thing, but just people in general, right? We meet somebody, if you take a moment to demonstrate that you value them, how quickly you can develop a meaningful relationship. And I think in our fast-paced world, where everything seems so, frenetic, so transactional, when someone slows down for a moment, takes that time to ask who we are, try to build that bridge, try to build that relationship with us, it's different in the best possible way. It draws us in, not artificially, but really it creates this attraction, brings us closer, which increases our relationship building and relationship itself.
Well, I think that it's a pretty good definition of what you're trying to achieve in leadership: effort, intentionality, compassion, really caring about the success of that person. But let's get to what we always get to, the science of it. So what? So what? Why should we care in leadership about these? Does it matter?
So to the question, why should we care? Why is it? Because leadership, I think leadership effectiveness is really limited when we don't have that relationship. If we go back to that fundamental definition that we use, leadership is influencing others to achieve mutually beneficial goals. Baked into that ability to influence is some kind of relationship. We may be brilliant strategically, we may be hardworking, but if we can't build those strong relationships, we're going to hit a ceiling, right? We're only going to be able to influence to a certain level, and it's not going to be a very high one. Without that, we're just going to be limited in our ability to lead.
I think that's very true on so many things. Like I think without that, you're going to be limited on what your team can achieve, and it may be acceptable achievements, but how do you achieve greatness? How many war movies have used the quote, "You're not fighting for X, whatever country it is. You're fighting for the man sitting next to you." Like that's the relationship, and that obviously takes it to an extreme. But like organizations rarely achieve greatness. Teams do, people do, and many times it's people being like, "Well, I can go here," which is what's been asked of me in requirements, or you know what, we're a team, we're in this together, we're going to achieve greatness, we're going to push a little further. And it's the relationships, I feel, that really push people to do that, to do things they don't think are possible, to achieve things that they really didn't think they were capable of, to push themselves, because they're not doing it just for themselves, they're doing it for the person next to them. They'll go above and beyond, as we like to say a lot. Like they'll go outside of it. They want it because they care about the person next to them, and they know the culture is that that person cares about them.
Yeah, I think if we look at what relationship translates to in our day to day to that end. And we look at those teams that don't have strong relationships. We've been talking about some with strong relationships, but the ones that don't have strong relationships usually have lower trust, which means weaker collaboration, if collaboration at all. They don't give that discretionary extra effort that you were kind of alluding to. They withhold that effort. And under stress, the whole thing is fragile, right? They may look functional, if you will, on the surface, but under pressure, they crack, they collapse. And conversely, those strong relationships, they empower performance. It's sort of like Roman concrete. I don't know if you're familiar with Roman concrete. Until just recently, we couldn't replicate it. And Roman concrete, when it is fractured, actually will self-heal and be stronger. And so it's sort of like that, where with tension, with stress, those relationships that are strong get stronger. Those relationships that are weak fall apart.
Do you have a real world example of this, of why it matters? Like, I mean, we're sort of talking in generalities, and we obviously all probably have instances in our own life, but do you have a good example of where relationships actually mattered for the outcome, the objective?
If we look across history, we could pick so many, right? And there's Cyrus the Great. I think about him a lot. When it comes to leadership, there's somebody like Herb Keller at Southwest Airlines. Relationship was really important in building Southwest, especially when they got started early. FedEx, Fred Smith, and they didn't have money, and the pilots would pay out of their own pockets for gas and stuff. It was pretty crazy stuff. But Francis Hesselbein, who was the leader of the Girl Scouts, and very much about relationship. But if I think about like a big, huge example, it's one, and we've actually touched on this before, but it's Sir Edward Shackleton and the crew of the HMS Endurance. And so, brief background: in 1914, Shackleton wanted to lead the first expedition to traverse Antarctica, dog sled and so forth. And they were going to land on one side of it and go across the South Pole to the other side of Antarctica. So it was this big adventure, right? And the advertisement for it that he hung up all over the place in England was it was pretty amazing. Like, I don't remember it exactly, but it's something like, dangerous expedition, high likelihood of failure. You may not return, but if you do, there will be great glory in it. Something like that, right? Like, just like, who in the world is
die? But if you don't,
right,
amazing.
You'll be famous, right?
Great story to tell.
Yeah. So anyway, in 1914, they set out on this expedition, right? And their ship was called the Endurance, and at that time it was a wood-hulled ship. And so they got down to Antarctica, and the ship got entrapped in ice, in this ice flow. And those flows, they just slowly migrate around. And so over time, that ice was just crushing the hull of the ship. And this was months on end that they were trapped. And they didn't have a way out, really. And so it was insane. Like, it's insane to read it, and that it was real. So they had these incredible hardships, and ultimately, against what were truly seemingly insurmountable odds, they made it out of their boat. They traversed part of this ice flow. They took their little lifeboats, sailed out across treacherous parts of the ocean. They landed on this desolate spit of an island, and then they sent a crew of maybe, I don't remember, 6 maybe, across the ocean east, almost 1,000 miles. All they had was a sextant, a little, this is 1914. They're looking at the horizon and the sun and whatever, and plotting on a map, water just pouring into their little lifeboat, 890 miles, basically, I think it was, to South Georgia Island. And they had to hit this thing, right? I don't know how many miles across it is, but it's tiny. So if you're off by even a fraction of a degree, you die. And they did that. It seriously is one of the most incredible stories in human history. And so they land, and in the end, every man that loaded up on the Endurance in England and went to Antarctica survived. 3 years. They had been written off as dead, lost at sea, whatever, for over a year and a half. And they made it. And instrumental to that incredible story, was that Edward Shackleton knew each and every member of the crew individually. He kept those connections alive constantly, sharing meals, sharing routines, forming and participating in activities with them. Those relationships were, in an absolutely real sense, life-saving for them all. So that story, to me, and I think to many scholars, remains one of the greatest leadership stories in human history, and strong relationships are at the foundation of the whole thing.
Talk about the stress of those relationships. Well, the stress that you talked about, the stress, like a fracturing of it, like how many times that bond had to hold together. And also the outcome. The outcome in this is survival. Like
Yeah.
the survival of the team. And so many times in history, you see mutinies and breaking down and the stress just fracturing those. But being able to hold together under those circumstances really demonstrates just how strong that crew had to be to survive together and just not to fall apart during those times of stress. Well, Tom, that's a great example of why it matters. But what does the science tell us about relationships? What does the science tell us about in leadership why relations matter? Because we're going to get to how we do it, and I think we're going to come up with some things of the difficulties of it. So really convince us with the science why this actually matters, why the effort, the intentionality, this work matters.
Sure. And there's a lot in this space. I mean, a lot. So I'll just hit on, some examples. By no means is this anywhere close to comprehensive, but I think one of the clearest areas of leadership research on this is on a specific leadership theory that's called leader-member exchange theory. And in the field, it's known as LMX. And basically, it's the quality of the working relationship between a leader and a team member. So a lot of work's been done in that space that clearly shows that the quality of that relationship is directly tied with outcomes. There was a major meta-analysis by Martin and colleagues that found that higher quality leader-member relationships, so LMX, were associated with better task performance, better citizenship behavior. We're seeing problems with citizenship behavior, quote unquote, professionalism, so forth right now in across many domains, but and less counterproductive work behaviors. So in other words, when the relationship between the leader and the follower is stronger, performance tends to be stronger too. In another meta-analysis on workplace support, Ng and Sorensen found that supervisor support had especially strong associations with outcomes like job satisfaction, effective commitment, and lower turnover and tension. Again, we're especially in medicine right now, but I imagine in a lot of fields, we're seeing a big problem with that. So again, this is
problems.
Yeah, exactly. So this is real time, very important. So that matters because it's one of the clearest signs of a healthy leadership relationship. That people experience their leader as supportive and not merely supervisory. Then there's work on high quality connections that associated with Jane Dutton and her colleagues. So their research argues that even relatively brief positive relational moments at work. So just touching base. Hey, how's it going? Hey, how was the soccer game this weekend? Or what? I know you were painting your living room, whatever it may be, right? Those brief relational moments at work can increase energy. They improve learning, cooperation, and resilience. So this point really is powerful that relationships do not only matter at the level of formal reporting structures. Human connection itself changes how people function. And fundamentally, that's what great leadership does. It improves how people function.
I mean, the science obviously is pretty clear. Like these relationships, like you said, it's the concrete that heals itself, especially during times of stress when that's when really teams are sort of to put to the test. Like you really survive those times, but it seems like they're always associated with better effort, better engagement, better commitment, and overall a healthier organization.
Right. And that's why leaders should stop treating relationship building as optional. I think the evidence is very clear that performance is an issue, a retention issue, and a culture issue all at once when we have poor relationships. And that investing in relationship is an investment in all those things. Not to mention just the fundamental human reality of investing in people, because people should be, to us, I think, intrinsically valued.
I think we've gotten the defining what it is, why it matters. Now let's get to what we always get to. Now what? Well, how do we do it? How are we going to be better tomorrow than we are today? I'm going to start with probably what I find the hardest question in these. It's easy to build relationships and people who you just naturally get along with. But what about the person in your organization that you may not care for as a person? You don't like their work ethic, you don't like their behavior. How do you build a relationship with the difficult person? Like, we've talked about it before, it matters who's on the bus, sometimes more than, but what if somebody's on the bus that you wouldn't have not necessarily have picked, you really struggle to connect with? And like, how do you build that relationship? Because I find myself most time just practicing avoidance, not having a relationship and focusing my effort otherwhere. But I know probably the impact is probably most if a connection with that person is possible.
Yeah, and if is possible is a question, right?
Mm,
Like that's the thing. We have to, as leaders, we have to figure out when is it possible, when is it not.
mm,
We have to go into every one of them as if it is possible.
mm,
It is possible that we could build a relationship with this person until they demonstrate clearly that that's not going to happen, because relationship is two-way, right?
mm,
It's not just, when I was growing up, how many girls would have gone out with me if it was only one directional, right? Like, I like her, well, she doesn't like you. Okay, well, I guess that's the end of that, right? Like, so it's a two-way street relationship. If the other person is insistent that it's not going to develop, then at some point you have to say, okay, it's not going to happen. And then you have to decide as a leader, is this person somebody that we can work with even though they are insistent on not having a meaningful relationship? Yes or no. If they're not, then you have to figure out how can you help them be better somewhere else,
mm,
right? So if we go into it with the mindset of it is possible, I think that's what we have to, as leaders. I think we have to approach it as if it is possible, recognizing that we have a tendency toward only seeing the world from our own perspective. That it's what we refer to as the fundamental attribution error. We see the world from our perspective. We don't understand all the information, the data the other person has. And so when they don't act a certain way, we attribute to them some reason for that behavior, and we may be way off the mark.
mm,
So we have to approach everybody. If we go with the mindset that it is possible, we have to approach everybody that this is a person, A, B, that this person has intrinsic value, and it's worth trying to get to know them for that reason, period. It's dignity and respect of another human. I want to know about this person. Start from there. Don't start with the mindset of, I'm going to try to build a relationship for this person so I can get a better outcome out of them. No, I just want to know this person. I just want to get to know this person. This is a person who has intrinsic value. Let's try to get to know him. I think if we approached everybody that way, we'd be so much better at relationship formation. Again, going back to some people are in politics because of various reasons, but there are a certain subset of politicians who have this amazing capability. They can be approached by somebody who is really angry, acerbic with regard to the approach to the person, approaching them with this inflammatory mentality. And yet they can respond in amazing ways. I'm sure you've seen that.
mm,
Balanced and calm and respectful, even though they're not being respected, even though it's really coming from a negative place on the other side. And I think fundamentally it's because those people that can do that, and we've certainly got plenty of people right now who don't, but those people who do that, I think it's that they see in the other person value, something of value. And it's amazing how disarming that is. When somebody comes into, let's say, your office and they're angry, they're complaining about something, and you take a moment to actually listen to them and care about their perspective and care about them as a person, because they're expecting you to come to respond in kind, right? To validate their anger.
mm,
But if you take that moment to listen, to try to understand, not to respond, that's disarming. Because it makes them, I think, in that moment realize, perhaps I'm approaching this
mm.
in the wrong way. And the temperature comes down, and then you can interact in a way that's meaningful. So I would say those are the things, to answer your question immediately, that come to my mind with regard to how do you go about trying to do this with those people that are really, really difficult.
I'm struck by, as you're saying all this, and we'll talk about this on other episodes, and we've mentioned it once before, what a powerful and necessary trait humility is in leadership.
Oh,
Because that is exactly what you just described. Someone's coming at me, and I've got two responses. they've wronged me, I deserve better, blah, blah, and to react like that versus this person's upset. They have value. I'm going to put not my value aside because that's not what you're doing, but I'm going to put my agenda aside and I'm going to help them. And we've talked about this before. A leader cares more about the success of his team members or her team members than of their own. And that's humility also. I mean, this,
Mhm.
like everything you were saying is just so wrapped up in humility and it's not about me. It's about us. It's about our team. I mean, a marriage is and any romantic relationship is always such a perfect example of that. It's us. It's not me. If I'm always looking at me, this will never go right, and it'll always be. But it's shocking in what you were saying, just how much humility came to the forefront of that. Obviously, deciding which relationships need that time and need because you don't have a CEO is not going to know every single name of a person of a large organization, but they can know the people that they interact with all the time.
Right.
So, so what else besides sort of knowing how to allocate your time because we don't have unlimited time? What else? How else do
Yeah.
people implement this?
I think there are a number of practical sort of things that we can think about. We hit on one earlier that I think is really fundamental. Step one, realizing that relationships are built intentionally, not accidentally. I think if you leave them to chance, you're not going to get very far. And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the idea of romantic relationships, how they develop, right? If you think back to when you first met Jenny or when I first met Miss, and it's the same with any kind of relationship, but this just amplifies, makes it clearer, I think, for most listeners when they think about this. You invest in that. Like you're not going to just let that down. You're like, wow, I'm trying to build a relationship here. I'm going to invest in that. And you're thinking about that. I mean, when you're a young man, you're thinking about that all the time, right? Like you're nonstop, like, holy smokes, here's this person. I want to have this, and so you're really investing in that relationship. And when you do, they grow. And if you don't, think about if you wouldn't have invested in that, if you wouldn't have really put forth the effort to try to build that relationship, it would have died. We could say, with regard to marriages, that's what happens, right? And so that's a more amplified, if you will, version of what we're talking about here. I think it's true of all human relationships. How many friends do you have? You were very close, like really tight friends in high school, really tight friends in college, really tight friends in medical school, whatever. And then you don't communicate anymore. And that relationship falls apart, right? It's that investment, it's that constant interaction, investment in a relationship that makes it last. So, very practically, that's step one, being intentional. I'm going to work on this relationship to make it successful. So I think that's something I would say right off the bat. Another as I think about this is relationship building practices. Another practice, if you will. Again, this gets to what I was just talking about with whether romantic relationships or others, is being consistently present. We don't trust people when they're absent. Especially when we talk about leaders. If the leader's never there, we don't trust them, right? Our human mind tends to, if we don't have information, if we don't know the story, we tend to write a story. And amazingly, we almost always write a negative story. And so the same is true with the absent leader. Presence means being available, means being attentive, being engaged enough with people that they don't feel like they're interruptions in your real work. So that's something I would think of. Another thing is to learn people beyond their role. And so I hit on this earlier. We need to know what matters to our people. We've got to know what they're trying to become, what pressures they're, carrying, whether it's at work or maybe it's outside of work. We need to know something about their family, their aspirations, frustrations, strengths, places where they're challenged. When we only know what someone does and not who they are, then if we want to call it a relationship, it's not very robust at all. It's thin, if anything, a veneer. So I would say that's another thing.
I'd add a third thing, and that's sort of goes along with intentionality is follow up. Like we were talking like, you meet a person, I'm going to remember their name, John, 3 kids, John, 3 kids. I say it to myself 3 times just to try to cement it into my memory. But then you got to do something with that information. You've got to go back to them. John, how are your 3 kids doing? Your son had a baseball game. the other day. I did this to somebody the other week in the hospital. I talked to them for a few seconds in the elevator, and they said they were leaving work to go to their son's first high school baseball game. So I saw them like the next. It just happened to see them Monday. This person I almost never see in the hospital. I was like, "Hey, how'd that first baseball game go?" And I think it floored them that I asked about that. Like it was just something that mentioned in passing, but the effect that that follow up had on that person and our relationship going forward, it is enormous. Another sort of practice, or I guess point, that we've mentioned multiple times before, and my kids actually came home with some piece of paper in elementary school that had these 7, things on them, and one was seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's a huge point in building any relationship, is being present, like you mentioned, being a good listener, and I'm going to understand. I'm not just waiting to respond.
Absolutely. That's something that I've worked hard on, listening to really understand what somebody's saying, to the point that sometimes I'm so focused on what they're saying that when they stop and they're expecting me to just mouth vomit something back at them, because that's how it usually goes, they're a little shocked that and I'm almost lost in just thinking about what they're talking about. And I have to clarify, I was just actually thinking about what you're saying. And then I can maybe respond to them. But it can be shocking to people when you actually take that time, that effort to listen. I think a lot of leaders listen while preparing their response, defending themselves, looking for the quickest fix, right? Like somebody comes with a problem and they're not listening to the person, may not be looking for you to fix the problem. They may just be wanting you to understand that they're frustrated. And if you jump to fixing the problem, you have missed the point of the conversation. And so I actually get to this in one of the chapters in the book, is actually understanding what is this conversation that we're actually having. Because most of the time people have two different conversations. The person who's bringing the problem is actually talking about one thing. Maybe it's emotion, maybe it's just sharing that. And the other person is talking about, how do I fix it? Or how do I defend against this? Or whatever it may be. And so they're not communicating, right? Relational trust grows when people feel fully heard. So that listening, really listening, is one of the purest forms of respect, and it cultivates that relationship in ways that is hard to replace.
I would say that aspect is probably no more important in history than it is right now. You think of how many people, when you're talking to them, are like this. I'm like, when you're saying that, I'm thinking how many times I've been talking to somebody and they've been either staring at their phone or they're multitasking or doing something, and I'm like, they're not, and they're just like, and then immediately start talking.
Yeah.
And then the example you gave of good listening, really trying to understand what they're saying, is just so important. And then follow up on that. There's consistency. We have to be consistent in this. And consistent is being truthful, being honest about it. So consistency seems to be another important thing in this.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. If we look at inconsistent leaders, they're hard to trust. You don't know what they're going to do next, right? We're experiencing that. If your tone, openness, availability, treatment of people change moment to moment drastically based on your stress level or the status of the person who's in front of you, the relationships that they may or may not have, what they bring to you, that whole thing, the whole relationship, the whole understanding of each other suffers, falls apart. People trust what is steady, what is consistent. And if we aren't consistent, forget about it.
I think that's so important. I think intentionality from the beginning, you're building a bridge. Really doing that, the leader going first, being vulnerable, being trustworthy, is so important. There's a difference between, from the beginning, building a relationship, and then there's the, hey, how's your weekend going? Okay, I need you to go do that. Like, building a relationship because of an immediate need from that person is disingenuous and can be more harmful if you never said anything. Whereas really creating consistency, building that relationship because you care about the person, you care about their success, really, really matters. They build trustworthy teams and they build trustworthy relationships.
Yeah. And if I toss in one more sort of idea, invest in a relationship before a crisis occurs. I'm reminded of something U.S. Coast Guard Admiral Tom Collins, no relation, actually told me when I was doing my work for my book. He said, You don't want to be exchanging business cards in the middle of a crisis. That's too late. And he was talking about, hey, look, if legitimately there's some crisis going on, oil tanker has ruptured, something's on fire, whatever it may be, you want to have those relationships ahead of time with people so that you can address the problem in there, right? You can work together. If you don't know people until that moment, you're in a world of hurt. The only time you try to connect with people is when you need something. That relationship is transactional at best. Strong leaders make those deposits in the relationship bank long before they need to make the withdrawals.
Yeah, it's building that foundation. So let's wrap this up with something people can use tomorrow. So let's boil all of this, the what if, so what, down to very practical applications for tomorrow. How can we be better tomorrow than we are today? How do we do that?
Yeah, I would suggest 5 things that we could do. First, schedule one conversation with a team member that's not primarily about tasks. Just sort of, hey, let's get to know this person a little bit better. Second, ask one more question than you usually ask and listen to the response. Listen to the answer. Third, and you mentioned this, follow up on something personal or professional that someone previously has shared with you. Fourth, offer specific appreciation, not vague praise. You did a great job bringing together the data in that graph in the presentation, whatever it may be. Fifth, identify one relationship you've neglected. Take a concrete step to repair or strengthen that relationship.
That's a great list. I love those. I think that's some very practical application of what we can do tomorrow. I don't think everybody's naturally outgoing. Like you mentioned, your father-in-law having this charisma. Not everybody has that, but there's certainly these things that everyone can do. Like everyone has relationships, very strong relationships with people who aren't necessarily charismatic. Quiet leaders, we call them sometimes, can be exceptional relationship builders. You don't have to be gregarious and outgoing to get people to understand that you care about them. Sometimes it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not about being the biggest voice in the room. It's about building that relationship. Often the best relationship builders, as you are sort of alluding, are those ones who are a little bit more reserved because they're focusing on the other person. They're not performing connection in a sense. They're not performative, but they're actually living it out. They're actually doing it in real time and conveying that value of the other person.
So one final question we'll wrap up with. So if a leader, let's say, hasn't been as intentional as they want to be, and they decide, I'm starting tomorrow, I'm going to really work on building relationships, truly building consistent relationships. What changes would we notice first?
I would say to some degree it's attitudinal. So we may not, if we're an outside observer, we may not notice anything. If we're the person who's decided to do this, it's that we recognize the intrinsic value in the other person and that we're aiming to invest in that. That's the key to us having the respect for the other person. That's the key to us having the energy to be intentional about building that relationship and making the investment to follow up, as you talked about, to ask those questions and remember, to take the energy to remember what the answer was. So I think it's an attitudinal adjustment. And then if we're on the outside, I think we'll notice they seem to be listening more. They seem to be paying more attention to what people are saying. They seem to be more engaging with this person. It's not transactional in a way that it has been. I would say that would be the things I would expect to see.
I imagine that starts to be like a small pebble in a very still pond of creating these ripples, that it's not affecting just that one relationship, but it's really a culture shift, a culture change of we are going to care about each other from the top down. We're going to care about each other. We're going to care about the success of each other. And really it becomes not about relationship building, but really about a culture force that's moving through an organization.
Exactly. And that's why it matters so much. Leaders don't merely get work done through relationships. They help define what kind of human environment other people are living in, working in every single day. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of what it means to truly know the people you work with and lead. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.